Welcome to Breaking Banks.
It might be Black History Month, but we're talking about the future of Black banking on Breaking Banks this month. In the first half, we talk about relationships making the seemingly impossible become a reality. Kenya McKnight-Ahad leads the Black Women's Wealth Alliance, which powers entrepreneurs to build intergenerational wealth. We're joined by her commercial banker, Mary Stoick of Sunrise Banks, who helped her buy a building that now serves as an incubator for Black female entrepreneurs. In the second half, Damon Jenkins, market president for First Independence Bank, one of the few Black-owned banks in the country, and Brian Toft, chief revenue officer at Sunrise Banks, and I talk about creating cultures that promote inclusivity. Everything from how we dress to how we talk is on the table. The conclusion? The banker's skin color doesn't fix the problem. This month on Breaking Banks, the future of Black finance. We're spending most of our time talking about the future of financial services as it relates to the Black community in this country. I'm very excited to talk about what's going on with the Black Women's Wealth Alliance, which is a bit of a tongue twister, Kenya. I'm not going to lie. That keeps tripping me up every time I have to say that. Can you give us the history? How did the Black Women's Wealth Alliance come about, and what are the problems you're setting out to solve?
It comes from, this long history of, at least my experience with women struggling to raise their children, single moms, my mom being one, and just not having enough, really in its essence. And in my work in economic development and seeing challenges that I just didn't think that our community would be able to champion without Black women, because of our power composition, the role we play in community. So we've got to, in my mind, we've had to really figure out how to support Black women being well in order to extend it to the broader community. So I got a group of people together, colleagues, community members, friends, family, to talk about finance, something I've never talked about, growing up. And 20 of us, and we gathered at a McDonald's on West Broadway on the north side where we all lived. And we started talking about it and figuring out, like, what do we need to do for ourselves? Because clearly there was not a pathway at that time to really guarantee that we have, economic success. So that's where it started and how.
So for these women you gathered, I'm going to guess it was a promise of more than McNuggets that got them there. I'm curious what that first sell to them really was, or was it as open-ended as we got to pull ourselves up collectively by the bootstraps?
Yeah, it was really just like me. I had went to Oakland and did all this research when I was at PolicyLink and learned a lot of information about Black money that I just didn't know before in the history. And I just started sharing it. And I was like, is this real? It was more like me doing a survey, like asking questions. And although Tim Baylor, the owner of that McDonald's on Broadway, did give us coffee and hash browns. So, we met there and he loved it. But it was really more so like, just like, I think people trusted me. That was one, because of my work and who I had been to them the whole time. And they knew that, I'd work hard to figure something out with them. So that was, I think, the thing that brought it together. But certainly it was, just conversation like, hey, who feels confident in their financial skills? Only one person said, they did. Who owns a house? Only one person did. Who makes over 40,000? Only 2 people did, 3 people did. And so it was just, and really just talking to them about like, really like how do we really like make more money? Most of us were business owners. And really to talk about like how we keep trying to make things meet that don't, and like, what do we need to do? So we brainstormed, and the fact that they had ideas and we can talk and share, I think was a thing too. So, and it was us, because we're used to being pulled into conversations, not really having our own. So.
Talk to me about Black money and some of the things you learned in your research.
Well, I learned that nearly 60% of the Black dollar was controlled by African American women, which I didn't know. I learned that we have this 1 point at the time, $3 trillion buying power that I didn't know, because the narrative in our community is that we're poor, there's poverty, right? You don't think about having any sort of an influence or power. And I learned, a lot of some of the challenges that the poverty or the struggle financially was concentrated in Black women and children. Not that men don't struggle, but it's just the children are normally with their mothers, when there's a separation. And so, and I learned about, the beauty industry, the kind of money that Black women spend there. I learned about our heavy consumerism and how we are not retaining not even 30% of the money that we circulate. And so those were just some of the things that really stood out to me, and how Black women were leading new business startups across the country. I had been at that time for more than 15 years, but not success, right? In the broader sense. And so it was a lot of contradicting facts to me. Like on one end, there's this, and on the other end, there's that. So it was really fascinating, though.
So fast forward to today, what does the BWWA do today in terms of solving some of these issues?
Yeah, we've done a lot of amazing things over time, but we land on four things. Is we have a wealth education program, one that teaches Black women about the concept, tools, and strategies of wealth. We partner with Thrivent Financial to do that. And then because of the entrepreneurship, we provide some business support services and get folks connected to the broader ecosystem, of course. And then we have a small grant program where we invest small capacity grants into business owners, students for tuition, and then, career professionals for like trainings and transportation. And then now we own a building, thanks to our partnership with Sunrise. We own a commercial building in North Minneapolis that we use as an incubator space for Black women entrepreneurs to grow their businesses.
Perfect segue, Mary. Talk to me about, how did Sunrise get involved here, and what was the mandate, and also some of the challenges? Because I think underwriting something like this, isn't right down the center of the fairway of your typical community bank.
Yeah, happy to chime in. Actually, Kenya's been a customer of Sunrise since before I came. She opened all of her initial accounts with Sunrise for BWWA in, I want to say, fall of 2017. And so you've had a longer relationship with Sunrise than I have, actually, but I've been here almost just over 5 years. And so, yeah, I think the relationship started with the way most of us start a relationship with a bank, in any bank, right? We open accounts and we start to kind of establish that trust. And you said something earlier, Kenya, about people wanting to have that conversation with you early on about starting something like BWWA because they trusted you. And that's exactly what banking is all about. It's about whether or not we have earned the trust, or we can earn the trust over time of the people who bank with us. And Sunrise is kind of a unique bank, right, where we have a social mission attached to what we do. We're about, access to financial wellness, empowering that for everybody in our community, and making sure that people have access to the mainstream banking system through a variety of ways. But in the spring of 2021, Kenya and I were connected. I don't even remember how, but you had this opportunity to buy this building in North Minneapolis. And I've been doing commercial lending for now it's 17 years. So at the time it was probably about 15 years. And I, as a person, just feel so strongly in the power of what we do in helping make dreams reality. So when somebody comes and tells me, I have this idea, I have this dream, I really want to do this, my immediate gut reaction is, you're a person of limitless worth, and I want to help make that happen. There's no reason I shouldn't believe that you could make that dream happen. Now, I have specific parameters or limitations I have to work within as a banker, but my initial immediate gut reaction is, awesome, let's figure out a way we can make this work. Let's figure out what we can do to make that happen. So yeah, we helped you buy a building, and it wasn't without hiccups, because that's just how purchasing real estate goes and owning real estate goes, and that, but it's the best part of banking, as a banker, I should say, working in this industry, is when we can actually get to that closing table. I have that closing kind of burned into my memory, actually, because it was such a powerful moment. But you asked about hiccups too, Jason, I think, or challenges. Really, it wasn't anything terribly unusual that we ran into, but it's kind of a lot of things that come along the way with purchasing real estate in general. This is my perception, by the way. It would be really interesting to hear Kenya's perception, because she was much more directly involved with the seller and with other and with the bank, right? Factors around that. But there's always sort of regulatory and restrictive limits around how much you can lend and what does the cash flow look like and what's the long-term plan for the property, because I'm sure Kenya will want to share about this. There's a huge vision behind this property that we're not quite there at yet. She's about to launch that vision and that next stage of redevelopment for this amazing building. So, really part of it was, can we help you acquire this site so you have control over it to actually make the bigger picture dream happen? And Sunrise is very innovative as a bank in being willing to do that, to say, look, the first goal is to get you control of this site, get you ownership of this site. So now you can think about what else are you going to do with it? How are you going to turn it into a powerful asset for the community, which is the goal and the vision? And how can Sunrise be a part of that next stage? And that's our goal as well. How can we help make that possible for Kenya and for her community?
Yeah, Kenya, I'm curious. You don't strike me as someone who's easily intimidated, but one of the challenges we often hear when it comes to banking and underserved communities and Black communities in particular is a level of intimidation of approaching when it comes to a loan. Deposit accounts being somewhat easier to do, but almost this like fear you're not going to clear the bar. What was the borrowing process like from your perspective? As Mary said, like, was it a challenge to even get to the door and to develop a business plan, or did it go relatively smoothly? And how was it to work with the bank?
For me, it was a question. And I went to Terry. Sunrise was like, hey, I want to buy this building. This is what I like to do. How do I make this happen? And she was like, well, it needs to be X, this, that. And I was like, all right, to figure that out. I didn't know what that meant, but I was like, I'll figure it out. And funny, because I met Mary at a event where the former CEO of Sunrise was being honored, and Mary's daughter comes up to me. She liked my dress. I was receiving an award as a top woman in finance, and then here's this pregnant redhead lady comes up running like, I'm so sorry, because her daughter's just talking to me. And I'm like, oh, it's totally fine. I'm an auntie. And fast forward a year later, I'm getting ready to buy this building, which, by the way, I was a tenant at the building for 4 years before I purchased it. And D'Angelo of Nail Partners is who connected us. She's like, you need to talk to Mary at Sunrise. And when I get on the Zoom, I'm like, there's that lady.
No longer pregnant, but
yeah. So that was like how we connected, and Mary and I. But I talked to Terry before that, and I just, I depended on the bank to be very clear with me, honestly, about what does it really take to do something like this. And I just knew that my job was to bring myself to the bar as much as possible. So I didn't. I had credit challenges. Oh my gosh. When I actually paid attention to my credit, it was like 500 and something. I was like, oh my gosh. So I had to work really hard. I had to pay off student loan debt. The challenge for me was that now, thankfully, I had some resources at the time at that level that I could pay $60,000 of student loan debt outright. But that's not really how that, works in our community, right? Like, who has, just money laying around. And even the amount of money that it took to pay for all the things, on the closing cost and the investigation of the property. I had a really smart attorney. That was my saving grace really through it. She walked me through it, and she's just as fierce as me, Juliana. And so that was, and I think Mary, honestly, and Juliana were, just really a big grace for me. They were very warm, very straightforward. Whenever a challenge came or was about to, I knew about it. So I was provided with knowledge, to educate myself, but also the opportunity to correct or to bring myself to the bar. I wasn't just told no, right? You know, I was told,
Right.
like, here's the process, here's how it works. And if you want that, still can't guarantee it, but here's where you got to at least be, bring yourself to. And that was priceless. And then that gave me a choice. It gave me the opportunity, right, to succeed or fail. And that was an important piece through this whole journey, of purchasing it. So I never at once felt that I couldn't do it. I just wasn't sure when and how it would happen.
What
Actually, that
advice
really,
would you go ahead, Mary?
I was going to say that really what you said is such an important mantra for, I think, really strong banks that are really focused and invested in their communities. And Sunrise obviously really subscribes to this. One of the things we talk about in our kind of commercial lending circles at Sunrise is the answer should never be no. If it is no, it should be more not this way. Right. So here's the additional steps, or here's an additional pathway or additional part of the process we need to go through in order to get you there. But for it to ever be just straight up no is, frankly, in my opinion, a disservice to the people that we're working with. There's always a pathway. We need to be honest and direct and open so that we can empower you, like you said, to make choices, to know what your choices are, to know what pathways you could pursue. And you might choose not to go down that path or not go that direction in buying that building or starting that business or buying that car. But it's not our job to say yes or no. It's our job to say, not that way, or we can do it this way, or here's another path that might work, or here's another resource that can help support you and make that happen.
Yeah.
That's what real equity looks like to me.
Yeah, it was priceless.
Kenya, what advice would you give for entrepreneurs when it comes to working with their banks? And specifically, can you tailor it, since you work with so many Black women entrepreneurs? What advice would you give them? Let's start with the bank relationship and expand to more broadly.
Build a relationship. Most businesses just are transactional with the bank, right? You make deposits, withdrawals, and that's the gist of the relationship, until a banker or somebody piss you off, you're yelling on the phone or something. I don't know. But I think like go further, build a relationship, ask questions, seek the information. I mean, just seek the information you need, ask people, push them to be honest about what it really takes, for the things you're interested in, right? And then how can they work with you to bring yourself to that point, right? And you never know what's possible. And sometimes it's not you bringing yourself there. It's also pushing the bank to really think about how to best serve that customer. But it starts with conversation, right? And a relationship that you have to build over time. And I'm still building with Sunrise. I'm not super set in that, but I think my relationship with Mary, with Terry, I've met with David once, and we're doing all kind of fantastic things. We just had the video released. I presented at your annual, I think just the relationship is important, and that's important whether you get money or not. The best people to tell you about how to access those opportunities with the bank is the bank themselves, right? So those relationships, I would just say, once again, is essential to build.
We often talk about the importance and the role of technology. And one of the important parts about technology is it can remove the fear of asking questions. And no one likes to feel like they don't know something, especially if they think everyone else knows it and they're the only ones who don't. Where did technology fit into this? Because I know Sunrise has also made significant investments in this. Let's start with you, Mary, but then also, Kenya, I'd love to hear how you leveraged other resources technologically to meld this together.
That's a really good question, actually. Technology has been part of banking since I started in it. It's just constantly integrated, right? Even something as simple as how we manage the construction process. So Kenya made some improvements to the building after we closed on the financing. And we have this fantastic platform we use that allows for an fully electronic interfacing, right, of submitting draw requests and the backup documentation, and then the bank reviewing it and people approving it, and it gets sent to title. And we're leveraging that kind of technology, so there's a centralized hub for all of that process and documentation, for example. that's specifically related to the loan itself. But I think, be more curious to hear what Kenya's perception is of like technology and how you've utilized it in owning the building or, through this whole process.
Yeah. Did that make it easier or harder for you?
In the purchasing process?
Yeah.
It was easier because I got to submit, like the initial document and writing up the vision, I didn't have to do this manual thing. So one, it made the documentation process and even submitting and getting all these things filled out early on, easier, one. And then two, being able to use the online system, although I'm not as good with it with the building bank account as I am with my business.
BWWA, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm like,
Yeah.
just, being able to get all that figured out. I'm just super busy chick. The other part is that I think one of the most important pieces is that it's allowed for me to have more access to Mary. Like we have these regular meetings, right? And that isn't always doable, like to drive here, drive there. So the convenience of us being able to connect through technology has been really important throughout, because we've stayed connected post purchase. So it isn't like this transactional. We've actually talked at least once or twice a month since that, and technology keeps us connected in that way. Sunrise has launched a video highlighting BWWA stores, so using their platform, right? Their platform has been, I think, very helpful. A lot of people like the video, so thank you all for that. It's just giving me more access and insights to the bank and them to us. So it's both ways.
Yeah.
So before we run out of time, talk to us about the future of this grand vision, both of the space and what you look to accomplish with the Black Women's Wealth Alliance.
Yeah, so the building is now called ZaRah, and it's a holistic wellness complex. So we have 12 women there now who are providing massage therapy, acupuncture, birth work, a lot of different holistic modalities, which is great. The goal of it is to expand our existing 15 suites into about 30, to turn our existing restaurant space there into a food hall, and to create event space where education and workshops and things can happen there, but ultimately to turn it into a public asset that the community is proud of, the community can use, and an asset that provides wellness opportunities for the community through its physical design, but also through the space, and ultimately that it's an incubator that will grow entrepreneurs through generations, by being an affordable space that is also beautiful, healing, and resourceful for the community. So that's the broader vision of ZaRah. And for the Black Women's Wealth Alliance is to grow our operations into a national institution as a resource for Black women to grow prosperity through the work that we currently do. So we'd like to build ZaRahs, of course, across the country. But we're starting with North Minneapolis, where things are the hardest, and that's the heart of the Black community in Minnesota. And that's also my hood. That's where I grew up. So.
Hang on one second. I'm having, we'll have to edit this part out. Hang on one second. Is the B Marketplace still open? The virtual part of it?
Yeah, it is. We'll revisit it this year, but last year but you can still go on the B Marketplace.
Okay.
We do
Let me ask a question about that. One of the other things that I'd found really powerful is you also helped a lot of these Black women-owned businesses get into the e-commerce space with the B Marketplace and a physical marketplace. Talk to me about the B Marketplace.
Yeah, so the impact of COVID, right? We know it nearly decimated like 50% of Black businesses across the country, in the United States. And one thing we know was true is that we were challenged in the technology world. We didn't have a lot of infrastructure. We do a lot of person-to-person business culturally, et cetera. So we used our platform to build an online e-commerce space for Black women entrepreneurs. And So it grew out of that. And we lifted up about between 30, 35 Black women annually, particularly around the holidays where, we would revamp their websites, their social media, their brand as much as possible, teach them about communications and marketing, and give them a grant to purchase inventory, and to get them prepared. And then we do a marketing campaign for 30, 45 days where we promote their businesses. And we did that in 2020 and 2021. We took a little bit of a break last year so we can revamp our own selves. But we've driven with both years over $100,000 into those businesses just through that marketing.
Fantastic. Mary, to close this out, Sunrise has made a tremendous commitment to communities that don't necessarily represent historically who Sunrise had served, to be more representative of the communities in which Sunrise participates. How has that played out culturally as David has made that push for the bank, and as you think of the culture of Sunrise and your engagement with the community?
Honestly, this isn't something new for Sunrise. I've been in this banking space in Minnesota, and there are a lot of banks in Minnesota for 17 years, and I've always known that Sunrise is a social enterprise as well as a bank. So that's been part of, I think, of the fabric of our mission and our approach for years and years. Since I came here 5 years ago, it's really struck me how much it's not just a brand. This is not just an image that the bank is trying to maintain. It's a mission that's carried out every single day and what all of us do on a day-to-day basis, regardless of our role, right? So my job as a lender is really to work with businesses, building owners, and help them grow, expand, start, carry out that next phase of their dream. But I see that reality at every level of the bank in terms of how we interact with our clients, how we volunteer in the community, the organizations we support, the ways that we're doing the video, for example, that we just did for BWWA. There is a very tangible, meaningful commitment to equity, to financial wellness, to empowering that financial wellness for the communities where we are located, which is primarily the heart of St. Paul, Minneapolis, our urban communities, but we serve obviously a full Twin Cities market. So I'm so grateful, honestly, to work for an organization that puts its money where its mouth is literally every day.
Yeah, and there are challenges, right? With that.
Yes.
And it's Sunrise has a mixed, reputation in the community. So I think the relationship piece, I just want to go back to that,
Yes.
is really important, right? Because everybody's going to have different experiences, with different folks who they work with in the bank. And I think, in this era, everybody's challenged to, especially as it relates to African American, historically Black folks, everyone's still challenged to really figure out real criteria that will meet us where
Yeah.
we are, right? And that really
Yep.
still hasn't happened. I think there are some exceptions, but not rules, right? Like I'm an exception to some ways, but I'm not the rule. And even in this next phase of, redevelopment, right? I'm still challenged, right? I'm not. It's not a done deal that this will work with Sunrise, right? It's a done deal that we're going to try, but
Yep.
it's still an uphill battle because I'm coming from a place where I don't have all the assets and everything that's really required to even do this. And so building that is the challenge, and where and how Sunrise and any other bank can meet us where we are, understanding the historical context of where we're coming from, I think has yet to be answered, to be honest with you. And
Yep.
so with lines of credit, with traditional lending, let alone commercial, and residential real estate. So we're not solving that problem yet as a whole, but we are making stride in figuring out how to, get more of us into that space.
I also think there's a lot of room for banks and the banking system, which frankly includes regulatory agencies that have a lot of oversight over what we can do, to do a lot more listening than we do. We tend to just do a lot of the talking and the establishing the policies or establishing the credit parameters or the guidelines, and there's not a whole lot of listening or thinking about how we can be innovative or think outside that box to meet real needs of our entire community. I think that needs to change much more systemically than it has. I'm grateful to work for an organization that at minimum is committed to being a part of that process of change. Not that it's figured out all the answers today, but it's committed to being part of that that change that needs to happen kind of in our American society, particularly around banking. So I totally hear what you're saying and see that. And I think relationship does make a huge, huge difference in anybody's experience with the banking system, but especially true when you're part of an underserved community.
Kenya, if listeners want to learn more or get engaged with the Black Women's Wealth Alliance, where can they go and what can they do to help support your mission?
Yeah, definitely visit our website. The revamped version is coming next week. Yay! As we're rebranding, but reach out to me, connect on LinkedIn. Let's talk. I think we can always use, of course, everybody needs donations, to support our work, no doubt, so that we can continue doing, the granting and things we do. But I think volunteerism, connections, relationships. We need more insight always. There's technology needs. There's a variety of things, but let's connect. Send me a message through the website. Send me a message on LinkedIn. Check out our social media. That will be probably the strongest ways to connect. But I don't know how everybody can help. You tell me how you can help. I'll be listening.
Well, I would add, we'll have the URL in the show notes, but also people should visit the B Marketplace when it opens up again. Put your money where your mouth is, as Mary said. Well,
thank you.
Thank you both for joining and having such a candid conversation.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Kenya.
Thanks, Jason and Mary.
So this is actually a continuation of a conversation that started in my kitchen. And frankly, I wish we were back in the kitchen because it was when it was warm. And it was over some cocktails, and was fortunate to have Damon and Brian were engaged in this conversation. One of the things that really stuck with me was when Damon had made the comment, we were talking about, why is banking hard to make more inclusive? And one of the comments was around this, what are the subtle signals that, tell people, this isn't the place for you. And he had made the comment that if you look at a lot of underserved communities, particularly Black communities, where there's an armed guard at the front door, sends a very clear signal that says, this place is not for you, or you're not welcome. There's some barrier to your participation here. And so would love to start the conversation there of, as a career banker and a Black man, Damon, how have you thought about this? Where are there unintended outcomes, unintended barriers that are built up? They probably were put in, for a good reason or thought to be a good reason. But where are these barriers, that you can see and say, I don't think that's driving the result you thought it was going to? And
those unintended barriers could be just that example that you presented in regards to the armed guards. I remember prior to the murder of George Floyd, you could go to a branch and you really wouldn't see a lot of guards. Typically, you would see a guard if any event, something had took place at the location. And then there's this whole perception of the guard's presence makes things seem safe. And I think as you go down that path, you must also look at, well, how does a guard's presence affect everyone? And so, I remember in your kitchen, we talked about, you have to be careful because that guard's presence could also symbolize or give the impression to the folks in the communities of color and the urban communities that we're here to protect an asset and you're not it. Right. I remember there was a joke that some of my colleagues had that looked like me about 10 years ago. And this is whole perception that communities of color, especially Black communities, are policed in general. It's the whole notion of protecting them and serving us. And so because you have systemic racism, because you have oppression and some of these things, there is a lived experience that people like myself or other communities of color go through. And I think as you make the decision even with the best intent of let's protect or let's leave the impression or perception of safety, you also have to be close enough and not be tone deaf into how that could affect the community of the people that live in the community, or even the employees that look like the community that you're serving, if that answers your question.
Yeah. Well, I think it was John Maxfield told me this. We were having a conversation about branch architecture, and the reason you see so much of like the granite and, like things that feel safe and secure, right? Like this is a place that is stable and will stand the test of time. But it also makes me think what you were saying, Damon, is like, is it also sending the impression is like, this is not a place like that you're used to or comfortable and inviting to?
Well, and in all honesty, Jason, I don't think it solely rests on the surface of a guard or being there present. I think you have to peel back the onion and go deep, take a deeper dive, because, there's trauma and unresolved emotions in history of, as a result of communities that have been oppressed or marginalized or just facing systemic inequalities that plague your perception. So even if you didn't have a guard, okay,
yep,
you're still going to have a disconnect with Black and communities of color when it comes to how much do we trust banks, right? Just because I think as you look at history, and then as you again continue to take a deeper dive with some of this stuff, you see that in some cases, banks haven't been as inclusive, and there's a certain trust gap that needs to be addressed and wedged. And so it's deeper than just the whole notion of having a guard there, symbolizing that this is an asset that we have to protect, or you are not welcome here, or you're not wanted here. I think when you factor in some of the things that have happened over generations to communities of color as it pertains to the banking system, I think there's a little apprehensiveness there anyways. And then when you think about, unfortunately, for whatever reason, communities of color and Blacks, don't really have that playbook of what makes you a steward of banking. How can banking really be effective and be beneficial to helping me build wealth? And so as a result of that, you just have so many things that affect that perception, if you will. So you have to call that out, but I think you also have to go deeper and look at the trauma and all the other experiences, or not, that communities of color and Black communities in particular have experienced or not experienced in the banking system.
Yeah, I want to circle back to that level deeper, but I want to stay on the front door for a second, because I think we're losing a lot of people at the front door here before we get into the deeper traumas and trusts. And Brian, I know this predates your coming to Sunrise Banks, but I love the story from your CEO, David Reiling, who hosts the Next Gen Banker. But when he returned from, he'd been working in Southern California for a bank, came back to Minnesota to take the CEO of Sunrise Banks, and the realization that the community that Sunrise served was vastly different than the community from when he left. And would love for you to talk a little bit about that evolution in terms of what Sunrise literally looks like now when you walk into a branch and when you communicate with people there.
Yeah, David is a great leader and a great listener. And I think when he kind of took on the leadership role in the bank, he looked at the community and he looked at the current employees and he looked at everything, and he just tried to look at the problems. And so he thought, okay, well, here's the problems we have in this community. Here are the things that they're telling me we have to try and solve. And so what can we do to solve those problems? And part of that is understanding who the market is, understanding what kind of issues they face, and then understanding who can help solve those problems. So, I think for Sunrise, at least, there is a mindset of showing up every day with the mindset of helping people. And that comes from the top with David. And that can show up in the employee base and hiring people from the surrounding community and trying to do our best to do listening and understand what those issues are, and then try to solve those problems with whatever we can. And for those that we can't, try to partner with others that can help, in those communities.
And so, Damon, I think now that we get back to, when we had moved back to the Twin Cities, knowing this story from David, I actually intentionally went to get the title for our car at one of your branches that is not necessarily a very white-centric neighborhood. And I was astounded at the level of diversity that was in this branch, right? Like, I was one of the only non-people of color in the branch, and frankly, it was refreshing. But it was also, there's this next level that it isn't just people who like look like the people they were serving. The way the conversations took place were also very different. Like the language, and I'm not talking like native tongues, but the way they conversed, since they were from the neighborhood, also seemed much more natural, which got me thinking. It's like, that's another barrier, because bankers tend to talk like bankers, which is not how normal humans talk. So Damon, I'd love to go to that next level of the onion. When we want to create more inclusivity, we need to open the front door wider than we have, that people feel welcome into it. But then how do we drive it further that they actually get the services they need?
I think you started down the right path, and you called it out. As they go and pull on that door, the folks that are serving the community need to be a reflection of the community. And when we say that, we tend to go right to, what's the color of their skin. But I would even challenge us to look at, is it a reflection of just diversity in general? Is there an opportunity to uplift and highlight gay, lesbian, transgender into banking? Is there opportunity to create a path for individuals with disabilities? So I think as a whole, when you start to go down that path, you really start to connect or create the opportunity to connect with everyday people. And what I've learned in banking, Jason, is that customers, when they show up, especially in communities of color, they tend to have a certain comfort level when they feel like the person behind the counter or behind the desk can relate to them. So it goes beyond even looking like that person, but to your point, how we interact, how we converse. Is it a way where I can validate you as a person, but also take myself off what I would describe as a banker pedestal and let you know that I'm here to help you because it's sincere. I give an example. I always tell, there's individuals that work inside banks that they tell their story all the time of how they had poor credit, how they fell victim to overdraft fees and all these other things. And so that's their why. That's their purpose. In addition to growing the business and serving the customer and making sure the company is successful, but how do I show that I'm relatable? How do I show that I've been there, that I understand? And that's true connection there. And I think what you witness is a certain degree of appreciation, because typically, to your point, when you pull on that door, if it don't look like you, or if it looks like your traditional banker, that's intimidating. Right. And so I think the more you can have a diverse staff that reflects the communities that you live in, but the more that those people can be personable and connect to people on their levels, meet them where they're at. Shouldn't be a general approach in how you go about servicing people. Now, there's playbooks and training about enhancing the experience of the customer, and that's important. But I think there's opportunity to connect with Jason, to connect with Brian, to connect with Damon, and that staff that tends to do that have greater success in winning the trust and building relationships of the folks that come pull on those doors.
And the part that really resonates there is it's not just a color of the skin issue in terms of being relatable. That you can change, the color scheme, but it doesn't change speaking bankeries and accessibility and empathy that needs to go into the situation. In the first half, actually, we had Kenya, and it was just describing, her experience in terms of finding accessibility and the ability to ask questions, which, question asking and being accessible, that's a big cultural change. Right? Like, we can be intimidating as bankers because we think about things as numbers, and fintech, frankly, can be even more challenging, even though you don't have the person across the table, like, who feels like they're judging you. You also can be intimidated by the combination of technology and numbers, which is almost worse. So how do we begin to change, culturally? And Brian, would love to start with you because Sunrise has been on this, cultural change. And then Damon, let's come to you because of, you've come from US Bank and Wells Fargo, and now with First Independence Bank. Would love to talk about how do we build cultures of inclusivity?
Yeah, I think Damon said it really well. It's you pull on that door, you walk in, and do the people there understand the issues that you have? And they may have been through it themselves, and now they're working at a bank, and they can go, "Hey, I get it. You want to be able to buy a house someday. How do you get there? You want to be able to save for college for your child. How do you do that?" And understanding what those problems are and how to solve them. And then the other part of that is not just inside the bank, but outside the bank. Are the employees of the bank going out and volunteering on committees and boards and working with nonprofits that then also help those individuals? So they're providing guidance and expertise on how to give small businesses technical assistance, or they're going to the home ownership center and providing classes on home buying and that kind of thing. That's another big role that a lot of community banks play, and especially Sunrise and First Independence, to be active and proactive out in the community and not just sitting back and waiting for the door to open or waiting for the phone to ring.
And I would add to that, just because to the point of what we were just talking about, because of all these other barriers or perceptions, people may not want to come and pull on the door. And so I think as you insert yourself in the community, it also allows you to identify and meet people where they're at. And so, for example, if I'm out in the community serving, then that earns me the right to talk about the bank, but I can expose people to the bank, right? That simple conversation that took place in your kitchen sparked this conversation today. So I think to Brian's point, it's important for banks or employees of banks to be vested and be involved in the community, because that's also how you connect, lean in, listen, and learn to even think about products and services that would be beneficial to those people that you want to come pull in the door. The other part of it is the more you spend time out in the community, it allows you to build patience, grace, and it should motivate you to understand that you can't take a cookie cutter approach. It's not as simple as just getting people access to capital or getting people loans. We got to build behaviors that make people worthy enough to earn the right to take advantage of banking to their benefit. And I use those words, excuse me, I use those words very specifically because, as I think about my banking career, one of the things that I have realized is that banking can be beneficial to people that look like me, but it's about meeting people where they're at, getting them access to the resources, and then helping them form the behaviors so they can see the benefit. And that's not going to be from your everyday person coming and pull on the door. That's going to be you partner with the community, identifying those opportunities and capitalizing on it.
Yeah, and looking for what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And then having those conversations, and maybe you're out there and you hear the same pain point over and over again. A good example might be, well, I don't have a social security number. I'm an immigrant and I'd like to buy a house. I have an ITIN number. What can I do? Well, there are options for that. So that's an example, a Sunrise specific example, but still that's the kind of thing that, okay, I've heard this same thing 5 times. What can we do? What can we put in place? Because it's not about credit risk at that point. It's not about risk at all. It's about getting people access to a system that they haven't historically had access to.
So today there's, less than 50 Black-owned banks in the country. And Damon, you're now leading the first Black-owned branch in the Twin Cities, which is also a culmination of a lot of banks coming together, recognizing the importance of this. Folks like Bremer Bank, Sunrise Bank, the folks at US Bank, right? Like Wells Fargo, you're where you started, right just before this, David. Can you tell a little bit about the mission of First Independence and, how important, like you came up through some of the biggest and, most well-known banks, and now you're like leading the charge for all intents and purposes, a startup, right? Would love to hear about that vision that took your storied career and said, I'm doubling down on this.
Sure, man. One, to your point, after working for two large firms, the whole notion that these banks got together in one room and parked their logos at the door was unheard of to me, right? And so that was the thing that was most intriguing, is that after the murder of George Floyd, all corporations, especially banks, had certain agendas that they wanted to be very intentional with in regards to serving communities of color, addressing the wealth gap, really targeting some of those root causes of why George Floyd would allegedly go and try to negotiate a fraudulent $20 bill. And I think the biggest aha is that we here in Minnesota, we own the ugly truth of having the worst home ownership discrepancy in the nation when you compare Black households to white households. So I think when you, as banks and those ones you stated, looked at that, they said, well, what can we get accomplished together? And how do we do this faster? And then if you pool resources and construct this ecosystem, it allows us to be on the same page. And so that's what happened. Those banks got together and said, well, you know what? To your point, we can't be the experts in this. We need some people that have been tied to the community. We need some people, institution that's more of a non-traditional institution like an MDI, right? And that doesn't mean that it's not a bank, but some of its specific initiatives is to serve communities of color, in particular Black folks. So it was the perfect timing. And I was just fortunate enough to work for two of the banks that was involved in it. And so I knew their culture of what they were trying to get accomplished, and it was sincere. For this to happen, I knew this wasn't the flavor of the day. Like, this was something that the banks, or that this team, if you will, was committed to produce short-term and long-term results. And then you think about First Independence Bank, the way the bank was started 52 years ago as a result of the 1967 riots in Detroit. And then 3 years later, First Independence was formed. Well, if you know anything about the 67 riots, that was all based on police brutality. That's what sparked the social unrest. Well, sound familiar? And then when you again go deep and look at the root causes of these things, it's the same systemic inequalities and marginalizations and unbanked things that unfortunately we still face 52 years later. So just knowing the bank story and how it was just how it came to be, and it was so parallel to what we experience here, it just felt right. The other part of it was, I strongly believe that the best way to put people on the path for generational wealth or to earn wealth is to own a home. We know that. We all reap the benefits of that. And so when you have those certain agenda items as your North Star, it just aligns with my why. The other part was understanding that these communities that we're talking about that are underserved, more than half of the issue is because they don't have the knowledge. They don't have the training. If you allow me to use my sports analogy, you have people in the game that don't know the playbooks. And then you have people that don't want to get in the game because they're afraid because they don't know the plays. And then you have people that was in the game without the play that they failed, and now they're opting out. So when you factor in all that, it was an opportunity to combine resources to say, again, how do we help more people faster? And then how do we ensure that we can work together and rethink this, create some systemic change along the way to try to bring more inclusiveness into the banking sector. And this moves beyond, in my opinion, just a moral thing to do. This is just good business sense. Our economy here in Minneapolis or Minnesota, and I would argue our economy across the globe, benefits from people that are influencers, people that have access, working together, locking arms, rethinking it, saying, how do we become more inclusive and bring in resources and access to communities that have been cut out? And then acknowledging the ugly truths. There was a lot of ugly truths that the banks had to acknowledge in regards to systemic racism and what does it look like to be anti-racism? Anti-race, excuse me. Well, I think because of the energy of this Minnesota culture responding how we did after the murder of George Floyd, everyday human beings modeled that. It wasn't about who you came from or where you came from or who you look like. It was about serving people. People rolled up their sleeves and said, we want to make this better for people. So I think on accepting that charge created this ecosystem. And what better way to solidify that we're really pushing towards equitable outcomes in this region and in the banking sector as a whole than to support our MDI. If you think about it, there's roughly about 4,500 or so financial institutions in the banking space. Well, there's what, 16, 17 MDIs. So again, this is simply about, Jason, getting a larger table and bringing more chairs to the table. And then collectively, how do we have diverse thought, passion, and really put people first in effort of coming up with short-term, long-term solutions that would be beneficial for everyone, regardless of their race or their walk of life.
Yeah. Well, you both are involved, well, you're institutionally with an organization known as NEON here. And we're not going to talk specifics to the Northside Economic Opportunity Network here, but there's something important to be learned that you touched on there, Damon, which is when I looked at the number of banks that are involved and the realization that the reason the banks are involved isn't because the bank's foundations and the communities investing in it from a community, but there's a lot of foundational banking work being done in terms of how do we create inclusivity and knowledge. In one session, recently, the building wealth through solid banking relationships, right? Like how a bank can actually help you get ahead. And to see, your CEO Kenneth was on it, and Jean Crane, who actually is CEO of Bremer. She's the reason we have a relationship with First Independence Bank, right? Is Jean said, hey, they're opening a branch here. Alloy Labs needs to get involved. How do we actually support their expansion, right? And with US Bank, like just how important those fundamentals are if we're going to create the systemic change. And I'd love for both of you, if you were going to give any piece of advice to a bank or a fintech out there around, they want to build better products that promote inclusivity, what advice would you give them? Brian, why don't we start with you, and Damon, then you bring us home.
To me, the thing that comes to mind first is partnership. Because, there's a couple reasons why. One is in a highly regulated environment like a bank, you can't be as entrepreneurial as you always want to be. You can try, and there are things you can do, but it is pretty tightly regulated. And so who can you partner with that can help solve the problems? And that may just be providing funding, it may be providing volunteer activities, or it may be literally partnering on loan transactions that otherwise wouldn't get done. And so I think partnership in those, some of the nonprofits like NEON, like you said, is extremely important. Damon has experienced that firsthand with some of the partners he's got with First Independence Bank. And that's great because it's served people faster. And I think people in their personal lives and professional lives want to be a part of doing something good. And part of that is where your money is. Part of that is what your organization is doing that you work for. And I think so partnership is so key to making a huge difference and making a bigger impact.
Yeah, man, I love what Warren and his team are doing over there at NEON because it's really about education and preparation. I'll use my Berry Gordy example. Berry Gordy didn't build Motown by just dealing with exclusively Black people. He had the spirit to collaborate, to share ideas, and to really trade resources. But the other part was, if you go back, there was a lot of artists that could have been #1 hits, but they didn't get their chance right away because you had to be trained, you had to be developed, and then when you were ready, then we would give you your chance for your hit record. And so I think about what NEON is doing with their whole incubator and the resources there surrounding young entrepreneurs or just entrepreneurs in general. It's really about that. It's just as simple as this. If you are just now getting into the entrepreneur space and you've never did in examples, maybe you have a food truck. This could be your first event. Well, you don't know what you don't know. So you haven't even thought about, do I have enough change, right? To ensure that as I'm fielding orders, I don't run out of things, right? And so NEON is there to one, support, give people that training, that knowledge. And they're showing the power of collaboration. Going back to this ecosystem that you see with the banks, and to your point, Brian, that was spot on. It's all about how can we work together? If we're really serious about addressing wealth gap and creating equitable outcomes, one bank can't do it. Even if we were even if banking was flexible enough where you could be more of an entrepreneur spirit and have some specific focus, one institution can't wedge this gap by itself. And so there's two parts to this opportunity. One, we got to address it, and we got to implement foundation to really support growth. But then we also got to stop people from slipping out the back door, right? As we are getting more people into home ownership, or we're getting more entrepreneurs into fielding their dreams of starting businesses, we also got to be as conscious and focus on the people that are in homes, the people that are currently owning their business, because you can't get caught up in the metrics. This is about doing what's right for people. And then the other part of it, I think, is just that keep your North Star or your center focus on doing what's right for people. Continue to leverage the community, listen, learn. So as you come up with various resources, it'll be a direct reflection of the conversation and what you've learned. And then people will actually take advantage of it. You hear all the time, well, I do this workshop and people don't show up. My pushback has always been, well, how did you show that it was advantageous, or how did you really connect people to the benefits of this? And so I think what you're seeing is something special. And I'm excited about it, because what we're creating here with the banks is going to be a blueprint that I would say that other states can use as a way to really show how to promote and carve out equitable outcomes. And then I also would state, given Brian's point about, we still have as a bank regulations and rules that sometimes don't allow us to be as flexible. But as banks come together and we now have an ask collectively, then guess what? We can probably have a greater outcome at creating some systemic change too. One bank going to lawmakers or influencers and saying, hey, I need you to do this, can be viewed as a selfish act. But where you got various corporations or institutions going together saying, we're putting people first, here is the reason or the consequences if we don't do that, I think that just puts a greater sense of urgency of your words not falling on deaf ears, and there's going to be some outcomes. There could be a situation where we may not see it all in our lifetime, but there's opportunity for us to start this thing, pave the way, and pass the baton to the next people that's coming behind us to get the work across the finish line.
Well, I look forward to the next conversation, to have both of you around my kitchen table with a beer to talk about this. I know you guys continue the conversation outside of it, and excited to see, because the system has to work together to change the system if we're going to fix it, Damon, to your point. And excited to see those conversations happening. I guess we should call this Jason's hometown episode on how do we fix inclusivity. But thank you both for taking the time. Damon, if folks want to reach out to you, if they find a way to support you, how can they reach out to First Independence Bank?
Thank you. So one, they can log on to firstindependencebank.com, and actually from a consumer relationship, you can start your account right online. Or we would love to welcome people into our home office here on Lake Street. We just built a beautiful new location inside the Hennepin County building. That address is 2217 East Lake Street, right inside on the first floor of the Hennepin County Family Service Building. And then obviously we started our first location over on University 3430 University Avenue Southeast, right across the street from the Channel 5 news station. In fact, it was an old Wells Fargo building. And I just would be remiss if I didn't throw in this plug. Next week, we're starting a $1 million deposit campaign. We're partnering with the MBCRE, so the Minnesota Business Coalition for Racial Equity. And they're leaning in saying, how can we support the bank? And so they're going to help us, and they're running a local and national campaign over the next 4 months to stand up deposits and help us with member acquisition. And as important, help tell our story and connect people with the bank. So looking forward to that. And hopefully we can use that time to continue to drum up support for the bank, to give us the reach to be an influencer in this space with Brian at Sunrise and all the other, what we refer to as the Fab Five banks that started this conversation, and was delighted to give us the opportunity to come here. And with me being here for the last 34 years, man, this is unheard of. And I can say this is not the flavor of the day. We're not going to turn the page on this. You will continue to see us as institutions work together. There's going to be some things that our hands are going to be tied, but we're going to continue to look for ways to include and make banking more accessible, and not necessarily make things easy, but make it simple and create the opportunity where everyone can have everyone can capitalize on the opportunity, as we have when it comes to the banking sector.
Now, if you want to hear more of Brian, I can give this plug because I don't think he'll give himself enough credit. Brian is also one of the co-hosts of the Next Gen Banker podcast that you can find at provoke.fm. Really engaging conversations, and something that everyone needs to know about Sunrise. It is one of the most socially responsible banks out there. It is built, and it isn't branding. It's they put their money where their mouth is. They are a certified B Corp, part of the Global Association of Banking on Values. And I think you can see it in every action they take. And Brian hosts some brilliant episodes along with David Reiling and Becca Haft. They're continuing the conversation about what that next generation of bankers is going to mean, and the importance of values in telling that conversation. What I miss, Brian?
You hit it all, Jason. Thank you for that. That was great. And you can find us at sunrisebanks.com. That's just like Breaking Banks, banks with an S, sunrisebanks.com. So thank you for that. I think you hit it all. And yeah, check out Next Gen Banker podcast. It's really fun to host and learn a lot about our guests and what they're all into. It's everything from fintech to climate action to government officials. And we're making some great connections and I think great strides with that. So thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
That's it for this week. If you like the show, make sure to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, or share it with a friend, or share it on social media.
We'll see you again next week with more Breaking Banks.